This episode is the last one to close season 1, and I've had the privilege of speaking to some amazing guests. So what better way to end this season than to show you my favourite snippets? I hope you enjoyed the selection of my favourite moments as much as I have enjoyed rewatching all of the episodes.
I'm super excited to be here. And honestly, the minute I got your email and I read the title of your podcast, I mean, I had to be a part of it. So thank you.
Well, I still think that I'm on the ladder to become an actor. I have a lot to learn, but yeah, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. I'm not going to say that I'm there yet, but yeah, people do recognize me or recognize my effort and my hard work. Pinky Mem Saab has been a beautiful journey for me. I signed another very commercial film with a very big actor back home in Pakistan called Shan Shahid. And that was my debut. And, while I was doing that, Shazia, who's the director of the film, was very kind enough. And the moment I read the script, Shadia, I only took like a day to decide, because when I was reading it, I said, this is a story of every person living abroad. It's an expat story, right? The obstacles and the hurdles we all go through, the emotions we all go through, and the insecurities we all have.
Wait, have you ever had a podcast with many people on?
No.
I've had it of like 3 people, but not this many. Okay.
Okay,
I'm going to do my bit.
Do you like
Then
normally
I'm gonna
guide
say-
the question towards someone or
Charles, do
what?
Yeah.
order that we know who's talking
Yeah.
where, and then we'll get into conversation.
Well, if you look at the films that I did, they were quite Eastern. I wouldn't say Indian in a way. The form of storytelling for Elizabeth or Four Feathers, or even What's Love Got to Do It, was very Eastern. So I never forgot my Eastern identity. Not because it was a deliberate thing, because I think I'm so in my skin is so I'm so contained into a very Eastern identity. I'm not saying Indian, but I'm saying Eastern. Eastern philosophies are different to Western philosophies. The way we look at life is different. The way we approach storytelling is different. Western storytelling is much more about the individual will. Eastern storytelling is far like circular, where destiny is a bigger part. And Eastern storytelling, if you look at it, in the end, offers many, many choices of where you can choose. In fact, you choose how you want to interpret the end.
But back to Fahad, like living in Brazil, I remember this story. So Fahad used to live in Argentina. And once I was in conversation with an Argentinian ambassador. And he was saying to me, Shadi, you should come to Argentina. And I was like, yeah, I have a cousin who lives there. And he said, really? There aren't many of you people in Argentina. And I was like, oh, when you see one, that's my cousin. Say hi.
Yeah, there were not many.
But
It was.
what was that like for you?
So it was interesting being in a place so disconnected from Asia, like the whole of Asia, because it's so far away, South America.
Yeah, that's correct. I started at Manchester United when I was around 6 or 7 years old. Was there for roughly about 10 years, all the way up until 16, 17. Then I moved over to Sheffield United and signed scholarship terms and professional contract at Sheffield United.
My message to any parent is stick at it. If your son's good enough, or your daughter, they can make it in the game as well. What you said there about it's a battle. But no one said to be a professional sportsman is going to be easy. There's always going to be battles. There's always going to be obstacles along the way. And it's either going under or over them. You're going to hit a brick wall now and then, but that's part of growing up. And not all the players are going to make it. So we also put other things in place for them as well, like the aftercare and education, just making them aware that there's chances of you having a career in the game is very minimal. So always think about plan B, plan C, plan D. And that's what we also put in place in terms of our mentoring program as well.
I think, for me, it's definitely been a journey. My CV prior to, being named captain did not have captaining a national team on it. So, it's something that, I've done my best to try to take in stride. And I know I've messed up and, I've probably had moments where, maybe my teammates weren't happy with, something that was done or said or, and I'm learning, right? And I'm kind of, as people say, like you kind of grow on the job and, you learn from your mistakes. And I think it's just been really nice though, because I really had like a really big support within the team. there's been some, amazing teammates that I've had that have kind of, let me vent to them sometimes, right? Because I need to, make sure that, I know what's happening and how girls are feeling. And
I think there's a lot of obviously negative press out there, and obviously barriers for South Asians in football. But for what I've experienced at the moment, I've had a lot of positives to it. Obviously, I had a few negatives. I've had a long career in the game, over 10 years professionally. So it hasn't always been positive. There's been a lot of ups and downs. But I think now in this particular moment in my career, it's led me to incredible opportunities. Obviously, playing for the Pakistan national team. There was some events that I did, a names program, which is set up through the FA and the PFA in England. It gets all the South Asian players together and all the parents to come and speak, and obviously there's a mentor program through that. So it's really opened sort of the world up to me. I can see different parts of the world. I've been to Pakistan now, and obviously in England, I get a lot of people reaching out from the South Asian background just for a little bit of advice or mentoring, and just to see, obviously, using my experiences and what I've been through on my football journey to help them to a degree. And obviously, being a sort of person I am and the way I've been brought up, I'm always happy to help.
Right.
So I would be insulted every day. Very lucky. And they would really pick on you. They would come up to you and they're like, dun, 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 dun. Like, bro,
Oh, wow.
who the hell does this, bro?
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean? Like,
but I think kind of in county cricket and lower down, there is, as well as, these kind of structural barriers for British Asian kids to come through, there is also like active racism. Some of the stories that you hear from, there was a Bangladesh player who played for Essex, Jahid Ahmed, some of the stuff that was said to him over the course of his career, terrible stuff.
It plays the dark skin bias, as you talked about, the shadi.com or whichever matrimonial site, whether it's online or whether it's in print. It also plays out by men demanding higher dowry, and also marrying a fairer skinned bride is seen as a higher worth, that this man's economic or social ability is such that he can garner a gori bahu or a gori wife. So it's equated immediately to a higher status. So if someone fell in love with a darker skinned woman, it would be, the question often is asked, why? What was wrong with you that you couldn't fetch a fairer woman? Right? An inverse of what my mother faced in the late 1950s, where she was asked a similar question. Why couldn't you get married to a fairer man? You're so fair and beautiful. Why did you settle for someone who's lesser than? So dark skin is always lesser than. And then to come back to the question of, darker hued models being now desired for modeling, I think it's interesting. Darker skin folks have been hypersexualized too. They're seen as exotic. And that ties well with the European colonial encounter, where you had the black and the brown female bodies seen as exotic, something to be consumed. If you look at ads even of chocolates, you have a brown woman displaying a bar of chocolate. So it's that kind of exotic fetishization. But of course, it's exotic to be consumed, but not to be taken in a long-term relationship.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to another episode of What's Brown Got to Do with It. So I need to give a prior warning about today's contents because I have no idea what we're going to be talking about. And I don't know what anyone's going to say. I apologize in advance, but today's episode features my cousins and my sister. So let's begin by introducing them. Sami, do you want to start?
Yeah, hey, my name's Sami. I've known Shad all of my life. Yeah, I'm in Milton Keynes in England. I don't really know what else you want me to say, Shad. Is that enough now?
I mean, Sami was enough, but okay.
That's so rude.
So until I was in India, I did not know what racism was. by definition, of course, but never experienced it. You're with your people, so to say, and it never happens. When you travel, you probably never noticed, at least I didn't. And then you move, and suddenly so many things happen where sometimes you don't even realize that there was racism, you know, or somebody was being snarky because of where you come from. But I think, like, I call it a micro insult, which happens to me all the time, which happens to people that I work with all the time, where they look at you and say, "Oh, but you don't look Indian." Like, and the way it used to boil my blood, you know, like, what does that mean when you say you don't look Indian? And it gets my goat when it is said as if it were a compliment. "Oh, but you don't look Indian."
I went and saw Fahad when he was in Buenos Aires. I stayed with him for like 2 or 3 weeks. I can't remember how long it was. It was good. It was good fun. But the Argentinian people, I think, culturally are very similar to us, like Pakistani Indian, because family is a big part of their lifestyle. Like having food together is a big part of their lifestyle. Like they were very welcoming. It felt like they were cool. There was no difference. It might just be Fahad's friends. I don't know, because
No, I agree with you. So, I mean, I think from what I've experienced, I think the only people that don't have those same kind of family values, or the cultures that tend not to, is Western Europe and the US. Everywhere else in the world, there's a lot more involvement from different generations of families being together and taking care, like people taking care of the older people rather than sending them to old people's homes or retirement places. That's kind of common everywhere, like in the majority of countries outside of Western Europe and the US. But unfortunately, that's the main source of general media that everyone seems to consume. And they think that's the way it is everywhere. Oh,
it's confusing, because at that time, lots of people just thought if you're Muslim, then you have to be Pakistani. And
Exactly.
I didn't even know Gujarati Muslims existed until I went to sixth form. I was blown. I was confused as hell. Like, there were all these Gujaratis with like Muslim names, and I didn't realize I was that ignorant before that. I was like, what? What do you mean you're like Gujarati? What do you mean you're from India? So that was like a whole new world to me, even. So I can imagine, like, when you're clustered in those communities, that there is no need to discover or know. And one of the advantages that we have in our family is actually education. So, you know, that our grandparents or, you know, Nana was so well educated, and they had traveled the world and they had lived in different places. And who defines typical? Like, who put out that standard for what a typical Asian looks like?
Before 9/11, I had to explain to people where Afghanistan was or what it was.
Wow.
Half the people didn't even know that we existed, or where exactly we're located. So it was a double barrier for me.
Struggle with this like identity crisis of, am I brown or am I white? You know, I grew up not being able to speak my mother tongue because my parents chose to not teach me and my sister how to speak Urdu, Punjabi, Hindi. Because like I could have been 4 languages within my life, you know, but I can only speak English because they didn't want me to have an accent, because they felt that I would get bullied. Yeah, they thought I'd get bullied as a result of having an accent. And the truth is, I got bullied anyway, you know, for being too brown. So I always felt like I was too white for my brown friends and even for my family, and too brown for the people of Southeast London, you know, and the school I went to. So I never quite knew where I stood. I found that I grew up wanting to be white or wanting to be black, even as like I'd rather just be one of these other races and just not my own race.
You know, I've always fought for justice. I've always not been, you know, vocal. I've always been vocal about inequity. I don't like when people are treated differently and stuff. And so whether that's in our own community, whether that's at home, or whether that's at work. And then there was another thing that I feel like I always got labels with, and that was being called a troublemaker. Yeah.
Yes, I remember this. Yeah.
And so when I think back to it, like, where did that come from? Like, if a black woman if a black woman, you know, comes into work, for example, and, you know, is vocal, she's labeled as aggressive. But South Asians, and this was certainly my experience, was, you're a troublemaker. But why am I a troublemaker? Is it because you're so used to people just not speaking up, or this unconscious bias that they have towards South Asians is like, you're not going to rock the boat. You're just going to be yes people, that we can always rely on you. And you'll never question authority. You'll never question anything. But then, along comes me and I'll be like, but why are we doing that? That doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, like you're trouble. Yeah, nobody like that. Then it reminded me that there's a song and it says गोरे रंग का ज़माना कभी होगा ना पुराना गोरी डर तुझे किसका है तेरा तो रंग गोरा है तेरा तो रंग गोरा है. And so for those who can't understand Urdu or Hindi, what that translates to is the being fair will never go out of fashion. What are you worried about? You're white, basically. And so the fact that these songs are still kind of playing and with this even in all these like South Asian songs, or you listen to, they're still referencing to Gauri. It's insane. I mean, I'm not saying, they'll turn around and say Gali in a song, but the fact that referencing to Gauri or white in a positive or in a way that, it's being highlighted in songs and, kids are listening to this. It just kind of, again, subliminal messaging, reinforcing that white is supremacy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, that song, for those of you who don't know, thanks Shadia for bringing it up, is sung by Ali Haider. You can see it on YouTube as well. I just want to go on to talk a bit more about the song, particularly because it goes on later on to say, Gori gori baahon ka maza to kuch aur hai. The pleasure of fair-skinned arms is somehow better. And so what it is hearkening to is the kind of sexual desire, the sexual pleasure or desirability of having access to fairer skin as a sexual partner is very interesting. And it's also reinforcing the attractiveness of fairness in a global world. And it's always done oppositionally. We have to understand when they are reinforcing gore rang ka zamana hai, or this is the world belongs to fairer skinned women, or that the pleasure is far more intense to have fairer arms engulf you in an embrace. It's always has the message that darker hued is lesser, that the sexual pleasure or desirability would be much less if you had a woman with darker skin embrace you.
Yeah, because I think we've just always visited Pakistan and spent a lot of time over that. So yeah, I would agree with Sami.
I suppose I'm Indian in the sense of like the way someone who's Caucasian or something might categorize a Korean person as Chinese, but
as in you're brown.
I'm a racist where you're Indian.
But also, I realized much later in life that we didn't have the privilege of just turning up to work in our pajamas and not brushing our hair, which later in life I actually saw a lot from my non-colored colleagues, that they would just turn up in whatever they wanted to turn up in and still be okay. But if I ever just turned up looking like a state, then I just wouldn't be taken seriously. Now, you're a lawyer.
I was the same. Exactly. I was the same at work. Imagine if I had just turned up, not, like you said, not, no makeup, not brushing my hair. I would have just been, or maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like I would have just been seen as, a typical Asian.
The question was, why would I make a better Miss England in comparison to the girls behind me? And I said, I'm standing here today as the picture of what Britain is about. I'm diverse, I'm multicultural, I'm a representation of who we are. We're
I love that.
I'm a British Muslim, and yet I could be, I'm I'm British and I'm a Muslim and I'm representing both. And this is what this nation's about.
But like, I feel like our generation was big on like massaging the older generation like feet or like giving a shoulder massage or whatever. Like growing up, I remember walking on like Fahad's dad's back like for time, like whenever he came to visit. But I don't think kids do it anymore.
Yeah, I make him, but it's actually called child labor, and that abolished in like 2000 and something.
So we used to get bullied left, right, and center, and I didn't want to change that. All I wanted to do was, to be honest, I saw my mom go through a lot of suffering. So I think the only focus in my mind was I wanted to give my mom the life that she deserves.
Right.
Honestly, I am of the belief that conflict isn't a bad thing. Like, I mean, it's exposure to conflict is great. It's healthy because it's the fact of life. It's the recovery from conflict, which is important for the children to see as well, just as important as seeing the conflict, because they're going to have conflict, whether we like it or not, whether we shell them into this like perfect ideal world, they will face conflict. The key is to help shape them in a way where they can deal with conflict in a healthy manner. And if you show them an example of healthy resolution, they will mimic that in their lives, right? And that was my parents. Like my parents, they're a rarity from their generation for sure. But my dad was the type that if there was conflict, like I got in trouble at school a bunch, right? And my dad would call a family meeting. You know, he would put us in the dining room and be like, what's going on? And this and that. And this is how we're going to work towards being better. And this is what goes in this house. And this is what's not allowed. And it was a very healthy dynamic. And so my dad was, without even, I think he was not even aware, but he really cared about our mental health. And mental health growing up wasn't as big of a topic as it is now.
I remember around COVID time, there was a huge discussion when it was kind of said that, well, if, you know, astrologers or psychics were so great, then wouldn't they have predicted that, you know, COVID was going to happen? And if that was the case, then could it have been prevented? I mean, how much of that to you is true, and how much of that do you believe in?
You know, Shadia, I believe psychics and astrologers are the soft target for everybody. First of all, for blaming astrologers and psychic for it, to me, it made no sense. It was a medical science problem. It was a small, tiny infection. It was a complete attack on science, which kind of deviated on us, but I don't know nothing. Second, who is listening to psychics and astrologers and remembering it? Please tell me. Yeah. I've seen a gazillion YouTube videos where people had predicted a similar scenario like COVID, like where a global thing will happen and all. Many years, for 5 years ago, even Nostradamus and all, they were there. Like in 2020, we'll go through this. I myself had made a prediction. I made a video on Instagram where I had said that Saturn comes into Saturn. Every 30 years, Saturn comes into Saturn for 5 years. And it globally, it disturbs the planet for 5 years. It started in 2020. It is going to stop in 2025. And you and I don't need to even discuss what's happening to the globe, even if COVID is gone. Even if the planet.
And the fact that, you know, your parents were so supportive of you, I think there's also this misconception that people would expect that, oh, you know, if they're from Afghanistan, they must be, you know, a certain way and really strict, and how would they? But people don't realize that Afghanistan, you know, in the 70s and 80s was thriving. Exactly. You know, people, the fact that they were away for education is actually just a true, depiction of what life for Afghanistan was like in that time, right? One of the main questions is, where are you really from? So what that means, translates to in the Middle East is, are you from India or are you from Pakistan? Now, my dad's from India. Our dad, because my sister's on here, our dad's from India and our mom is from Pakistan. But for you guys, a lot of the time, like, you actually are more Pakistani than you are Indian. Although our grandparents are actually very Indian because they were like born in India and they still have such like heavy Indian roots. They've got a lot of family still there. But you guys have like never even been to India. And do you even identify as Indian? I'm going to Sami, why don't you start? Where are you really from?
I would say Pakistan, but I think your point is really valid in terms of it's the place that you've got the most connection with, because obviously yes, grandparents from both mums and dad's sides are from India. Still have links in India, family still in India, as far as I'm aware. But I've never met them. Well, some of them, but never met them in terms of going to India. Whereas Pakistan, the reason I've got a big affiliation is I don't remember this, but when I was like 3 or 4 months old, mum took me for a year. And then after that, every year we either used to go out or my nana and nani used to come over and look after us from there. So we had that affiliation from early. Yeah, so Pakistan is where I would identify from.
Do you think that's changed?
No, I don't think that's changed at all.
Oh, really?
I think racism is still there. It's in micro, I think maybe it's been phased out through the generations, but there'll always be generations that will uphold it. There'll always be people that will stay in there. It depends where you are in the country, where you are in the world. But as I again mentioned, you mentioned it in your article, or one of the articles, is that we even have it within amongst our own that we have racism, and that's the bit that I was bullied by Indians at school. I'm like, guys, we're the same, but they didn't see me like that. And now I can look back and think that they were probably bullied and they just needed someone else to bully, right? But there was still that element that there was hatred within the communities, within the cultures, within the castes. Like I can't comprehend why it's so important.
Exactly. For saying that, there's a lot of microaggressions and stuff, even with South Asians to each other, like, fat shaming, color shaming, education shaming, socioeconomic like shaming. There's so much of it from ourselves.
First thing that they would ask me, what's your opinion on the British soldiers in Helmand province of Afghanistan? I'll be very honest with you. I had no idea where or what Helmand was. I wasn't born in Afghanistan, nor I lived there for about 3 months. Why would I know, as an 18-year-old British kid, why would I know where Helmand province of Afghanistan is?
I think my life just, and you know this, and I don't know how to say this without crying, but my life has never been easy. And I feel like I've always had to fight against the narrative. I just feel like nobody's ever understood me. Nobody's ever understood like why I am the way that I am. For the longest time, I was just working with a bunch of like upper class white men. And I remember having to be really like work twice as hard as them and always questioning like why though.
I think the issue is for journalists in general.
Right.
I mean, we've seen more journalists killed in Gaza in this conflict proportionately than pretty much anywhere else. And now more specific targeting of journalists. That's been one of the biggest dangers, one of the biggest horrors about being a journalist in this day and age. The last couple of decades, maybe 3 decades, people have realized the power of the media in changing the narrative, and those involved in the conflict now target journalists as a way of trying to avoid their narrative being contradicted. So Russia has clamped down on journalists in Ukraine, and in Russia, of course. When the narrative is in danger of being upset, according to what that side wants, I think that's when journalists are most threatened. So, yes, people want to control the narrative, and they will accordingly try to silence journalists. Sometimes it's violence, shooting, direct targeting, as we have seen in Gaza. And in some cases, it's silencing through the courts, as we saw in some places like the Philippines and so on in the past. It depends very much on the regime.
Because the way they wanted to depict me is that this Cinderella story, that I came from this barbaric background of Afghanistan, living in caves, and British government and the British public saved me, and now I'm
the rescuers,
queen.
And as Shadia mentioned, like I've lived in a few places. Right now I'm in Brazil, and they don't know the difference between India and Pakistan. Like obviously there's a lot of history and turmoil and trauma that our own forefathers have experienced because of what went down, but the rest of the world is kind of oblivious. It's not in their backyard, so it's not really a talking point for many people. Myself personally, out of the two, obviously Pakistani, but that's just because I've got to pick out the two. I was born and raised in the UK. Again, I don't really resonate with being British either, or from the UK. I personally, I've told you before, but I tend to say that I'm a Londoner because I feel that that represents me the most because of the multicultural dynamic of London itself. And, you know, I don't feel like I'll be getting judged if I went further up north in the UK. Like, I'm pretty sure most people would look at me and think, oh, that's a British guy walking down the street. It's not going to happen. So it's, and Pakistan, like, yeah, we've similar to some, probably less connection, but we used to travel there quite regularly. We have strong ties. Our parents are very strong Pakistan supporters. We also resonate with the culture, but the culture as well is also very linked to the Indian culture. So there's a lot of crossover. It's a complicated topic.
Then they would come and stand outside my house because every time they met my parents, my mom's got a master's in law and my dad has PhD in engineering. Wow. They're both very, very academic, eloquent, educated people. And they were expecting my dad to come out with a big beard, a salwar kameez, my mom wearing a salwar kameez, and you could see the literal disappointment in these reporters' faces.
There is, like you mentioned, there's a lot of there's a lot of things happening around the world right now with the war in Gaza, the turmoil in Congo and Sudan and so on and so forth. So in your extensive coverage of global issues, such as conflicts and wars, how do you ensure that the framing of such stories is balanced and not influenced by dominant cultural narratives?
As a journalist, I'm old school, and I probably stick out a bit nowadays because I don't take positions. And I know some people like that, some people don't. If I'm interviewing someone from one side of a conflict or the other, and I'm letting them speak, doesn't mean I'm not asking the right questions. It simply means I want to hear what they have to say. And I have a belief that the truth speaks for itself to some degree. When someone is pushing out and pumping a narrative that's obviously wrong by what people see out there, and social media backs that up a lot with what we see, I feel the truth filters through. So I'm a bit old school. I don't feel I have to control the narrative, in terms of a South Asian perspective or anything. It was beaten into me at the BBC to be neutral. Right. The old school training of journalism in Britain was broadcasters don't editorialize. And as a result, we had to focus on not using adjectives, not giving our opinions. Journalists in those days didn't say, I think, or in my opinion, or I feel. And I think that was actually a very important factor in training people to be neutral and discuss stories from a story and fact and figures perspective rather than commentary and opinion, which has taken over.
Are you even Brown if when you went to see family, like with your mom and dad when you were a kid, and they said they were gonna leave, but you end up staying for like another 2 hours at the door, like when they're like, no, like have some chai or do this or do that. You knew no one was going anywhere, man. We were playing on a PlayStation or whatever it was and just carried on. We were like, this isn't gonna be done for another hour at least.
And we literally like, don't call me until you sat in the car. Okay?
Yeah, trust me, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm just as American as I am Indian. I love both my sides of my world. And I think Virgin Radio, what I love about Virgin and why I've been there now for 15 years is that we reflect the society that we live in. We are from all edges of the world. We all speak different languages, and we're happy to celebrate all cultures because that's the way the world should be. We don't all live in little boxes. We all mingle and we all speak to each other. And I think at Virgin Radio, I hope we do a really good job.
Because my main job is here not to tell you what's going to happen in your life only. My main job is here to introduce you, to tell you what you are, what you're carrying, what your soul is carrying.
Okay, stop. Guys, stop. We're going to do this again. We're going to start again. This is just like awful. Okay.
Thank you for supporting me through such a sensational season 1. This one's definitely going to be hard to beat, but I cannot wait to share season 2 with you all very soon. In the meantime, don't forget to share, like and subscribe to all the What's Brown Got to Do With It channels. Until then, see you soon.